Are we talking about this, ALEC? No?
ALEC, organized in 1973, was founded most in part by Illinois House officer Mark Rhodes and New Right movement leader Paul Rayrick. Founded as the Conservative Caucus of State Legislators, it was a response to the defeat of Republican Barry Goldwater in the 1964 presidential election against Lyndon B. Johnson. The CCSL was a vocal opponent of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and in fighting wage and price controls in the photograph below. Pictured from left to right are Mark Rhodes, Senator James Buckley of New York, State Representative Henry Hyde of Illinois, and Illinois Comptroller George Lindbergh, all major founders of ALEC.
The key to ALEC's rise to such an influential position in American politics does not come without the importance of key politicians. Consequently, many now influential politicians had a kick start from joining ALEC early in their careers. John Boehner, Speaker of the House from 2011 to 2015, John Kasich, the Governor of Ohio since 2011, and Jack Kemp, a House member from 1971 to 1987, are all members of ALEC who owe their prominence in part to the connections they made from joining ALEC. Additionally, some key members of ALEC are from Oklahoma. Longtime Oklahoman Senator and successor to John McCain's role as chairman of the Armed Services Committee, James Inhofe, is an active member in ALEC. Gary Bands, House member from 2004 to 2016, is also a member of ALEC. Interestingly enough, as a resident of Midwest City, all three of Band's children graduated from Midwest City High School. A couple of years after the CCSL's founding in 1975, it decided to change its name to ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, in order to distance itself from the increasingly negatively connotated word conservative. Its goal then became to advance the fundamental principles of free market enterprise, limited government, and federalism. For the most part, through seedy dealing and the public's ignorance to its existence, ALEC is accomplishing this. ALEC has played an active role in domestic and foreign U.S. politics in the past 40 years. In the 1960s, the U.S. started to become involved in efforts to end South Africa's apartheid. But efforts to end apartheid did not take off until the 1980s. Naturally, ALEC strongly opposed any investment into the affairs of foreign governments, especially in civil liberties. Domestically, in 1985, ALEC released a memo taking a stance on homosexuality. Homophobia began to take a strong roots in conservatives in the late 1970s and especially in the 1980s due to strong vocal homosexual rights movements. Because of growing resentment, ALEC releases a memo stating its strong opposition to homosexuality, going so far as to say that the U.S. should work to fight the homosexual movements because the vast majority of pedophiles are homosexual. This memo was a precursor to the HIV Assault Act, which we will talk about later.
With the tremendous helping hand of ALEC, the Stand Your Ground gun law has been firmly affixed in the legislation of 30 states after it was kickstarted by its passing in Florida in 2005. In 2012, George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin after an alleged altercation between the two. Zimmerman was charged with the death of Martin, but acquitted due to the Stand Your Ground law passed in 2005. This left ALEC in an extremely bad position in the PR department. Immediately following the shooting, Color of Change began lobbying for major corporations to cease their support of ALEC. Color of Change prompted several major corporations to withdraw their support from the organization, such as Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, McDonald's, Walmart, Amazon, Apple, General Motors, Procter & Gamble, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In accordance with conservative beliefs and values, ALEC has, in the past, denied evidence of climate change. In 2014, major environmental concerns from certain interest groups caught the attention of the news media, and after some lobbying, prompted more major corporations to withdraw their support of ALEC. Influential tech companies like Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Microsoft, eBay, Uber, Lyft, and AT&T began withdrawing their support from ALEC. Surprisingly, even major oil companies like British Petroleum, Northrop Grumman, and Occidental Petroleum pulled support from ALEC as well. A model bill is a template form that legislators can purchase, modify, generally only very slightly if at all, and present to their legislative bodies. Oklahoma is a big ALEC state. This seemingly swindle of a system is not illegal either. Members of ALEC will assemble once each year to develop model bills dealing with a certain number of pressing topics of that year, which they will begin to peddle to legislators around the country.
In 1981, the CDC publishes an article describing a rare lung infection, pneumocystis carinii. After some unusual infections occurred in 5 healthy white men, HIV was affectionately called the gay cancer or the gay plague. Over the next 10 years, growing tensions between conservative and homosexual communities culminated in the HIV Assault Act. This act made it a crime to have HIV and not disclose your status to your sexual partner. Whether this act was instituted out of necessity or fear and discrimination is debatable, but historically it is the most likely case.
In 2003, ALEC introduced the Animal and Ecological Terrorism Act, which detailed and classified civil disobedience and destruction by environmental means a form of domestic terrorism. Anyone convicted through the parameters of this bill would be added to the National Terrorist Registry. Coincidentally, the national legislation that describes the same thing is, for the most part, in verbatim to the ALEC model bill. Even more coincidentally, the national legislation, the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, was sponsored by James Inhofe in the Senate.
SB 1070, Support Our Law Enforcement and Safe Neighborhoods Act, has become increasingly more controversial since its introduction in 2010. Increasingly so since the election of President Donald Trump in 2016. Since its 2010 introduction, it has been introduced in 16 states and passed in 4. It has been called the toughest illegal immigration law ever passed in U.S. legislation. Political scientists theorize there is a direct correlation between the rise in sanctuary cities and the implementation of SB 1070.
ALEC has assisted in establishing some of the most discriminatory laws in the 21st century. ALEC's current model bill has only been introduced in 6 states, but only passed in Arizona. It calls for an extreme strengthening in requirements for the use of state-issue IDs when voting. If passed on a more widespread scale, it could severely limit the voting rights for the elderly, poor, students, and minorities. All this is a clear and direct violation of the 26th Amendment. Outside of the U.S., ALEC has lobbied to remove plain cigarette packaging laws and by contacting governments in Canada, the U.K., and Australia.
One of former President Obama's biggest goals in taking office in the 2008 and 2012 was reforming the American healthcare system. This caused hoopla in conservative circles around the country who claimed its destruction of the American dream of life. ALEC naturally, therefore, was fervently against the ACA's Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, passing through Congress and the Senate. In 2012, ALEC filed an amicus curiae brief in National Federation of Independent Business versus Sebelius to try to strike down Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. In 2013, ALEC attempts to draft bills that would block implementation of ACA, most important of which is the Healthcare Freedom Act, designed to take healthcare providers' license to interact with ACA exchanges if they accept subsidies.
Say you don't know me, I recognize my face. Say you don't care who goes to that kind of place. Knee deep in the hoopla, sinking in your fight. Too many runaways eating up the night. Macaulay plays the mama. Listen to the radio. Don't you remember?
About this city! Wave at this city on June,